Live everywhere.
Daily Co's Radio on netrootsradio.com presents
David Walton. Kagro in the Morning Show. Now, here's David Waldman.
Hey, good morning, everybody. How you doing? It is Thursday, April 27th, 2017. Time for another show. Lots going on in the background. You guys should see what goes on in the background as between me and Justice. Or really, Justice, unfortunately, because I'm getting ready for the show, Justice entertains himself this way every morning. And I see it. You don't get to see it. He tells me each day. He gives me the regular signals. Everything's going fine. Your interlude is on. Here comes your introduction music. All the signal is great. But the news of the day is always wrapped up in it. He tells me this morning, for instance, interlude told voice, that is the VOICE, the new Gestapo that's going to round up all of our immigrants. Interlude told voice, the Mexicans did it. The intro comes on, and he says, intro likes the way Ivanka holds that mic. You heard those comments yesterday. And levels want a waiver to 5x5. Everything's fine. That's just his cute little way of saying, I've been reading the news too, and monitoring the show and making sure everything's going on. Thanks very much for getting up so early. He's a West Coaster, gets up every day to make sure that this signal comes out to you for no particular reason, just loves radio. So how do you like that? Everybody, keep that in mind too. And when you're thinking about how to spread whatever wealth it is we have around, and as I keep reminding you, of course, the donation door is always open for us at patreon.com, and now it's Square Cash as well. You can find the links to those every day in our morning posts and in our midday linky posts and in the evening. But keep in mind that Netroots Radio operates on donations too, netrootsradio.com, and it should be all over the page. You should have no trouble finding out how to donate there. But that's not what this is about. But it's a good idea, nonetheless, to keep things in, to keep everybody in mind, and keep in mind that the Justice wakes up. What time is it? He's a West Coaster, like I said. I don't even know what time it is here, so there's no chance I'm going to figure it out there. Forget about it. He's thinking about moving to Hawaii. It's only going to make it more difficult. So send bigger donations. How about that? That he's not really thinking of moving to Hawaii, but if it motivates you, you can think of it that way. Bill, who's an East Coaster in Portland, Maine, not Portland, Oregon. Imagine if that were the case. Lets everybody know, as always, Daily Coast Radio is live now. Kagro X, that's me, David Waldman, says you're all kicked out of NAFTA until we find out what's going on. And I don't know whether we're in or out. Last night we were out in the afternoon, going to be out, and then we're back in the evening because I guess the last people he talked to were the Prime Minister of Canada and the President of Mexico, and unsurprisingly, I guess, they talked him into staying, or at least announcing that he wasn't going to announce the withdrawal of the United States from the North American Free Trade Agreement at this time. So I guess he gets to threaten us with it later, but this is becoming a pattern. Oliver Willis noticed it this morning. That's what Trump does. Threaten something crazy, get the headline, and then change your mind and turn around and go back. So we're in NAFTA, we're out. We put our left foot in, we put our left foot out, left foot in, shake it all about. I can't tell you whether we're in this trade agreement anymore or not. It feels like I'm high or something, but I'm not. I just don't know whether we're in NAFTA or not. One of many flip-flops just yesterday. We mentioned yesterday was a very busy day. We'll catch up with all of the things that we had to lay aside. Well, some of the things anyway that we had to lay aside yesterday just to keep up with the nonsense that was going on. Greg Dworkin, of course, has a raft of stories for us to start with. I'll let him run through those, but I have fair warning from him that there is a complex matter of procedure that he wishes to ask me about. I think I can offer an answer. This one, I would say, is nearly complex enough that I would give most of the press a pass to simply say, for complicated reasons, this happened. But, you come to a radio show like this one, possibly out of habit, possibly out of boredom, but if not either of those two things, maybe for an explanation of those things which other media outlets are essentially too afraid to explain to you. There's one that's not, and we'll be basing the discussion on the back channel discussions via Twitter, which I guess isn't really very much of a back channel, that Brian Beutler has been having with Senate procedural experts, other than myself, which is fine. I was busy, and I don't think I would have known the answer right off the bat the way these guys did. The key will be explaining it. It's all there, and Greg read it, and he's a doctor. He's asking the question, I think, because I saw the words you used. It just doesn't make a great deal of sense. So we'll try and explain that and resolve some of the mystery about what is this fantastical item. It has to do with the healthcare bill. It's a big deal, but we'll wait to get to it. It's not going to change your opinion of the bill or what they've done to it since it flopped last time. It's just going to help you understand the sort of hoops that you have to jump through, and will probably help explain the frustration level that certainly people like Donald Trump will have with issues like this, and probably a good portion of the Senate, too. There aren't very many senators left who really love this stuff. Most of them hate it, and most of the Republicans, newly elected Republicans, say in the past 5 to 10 years, are of the why doesn't somebody just say sort of school of governance, and they can't understand this stuff, and it probably makes them pretty angry. But it's kind of a funny story. Anyway, we'll catch up with that and do our best at explaining it in just a few minutes. And let's see, round up the most interesting stories of the day, some of which will be ripped from the headlines and some of which are buried leads that we'll dig up and check out as we go along. Let's see. I did see last night that, just by way of quick hits, we all know, I don't know what they did exactly with Jesse Waters, Bill O'Reilly's ambush interview guy over at Fox. I don't know whether they gave him his own show or they made him the guy of some other show. I'm not exactly certain what the lineup situation was because I thought they gave O'Reilly's time slot anyway, if not the show itself, to Tucker Carlson, which is horrible enough all by itself. But Jesse Waters, I guess, got a chance to be on the air yesterday, and he I was going to say he blew it really quick and ruined his opportunity. That's not, no pun intended. Of course, he made these comments about Ivanka Trump and the way she was holding the microphone while she was over in Germany and, sort of raised his eyebrows and made little motions that made it clear that his mind was in the gutter at the time, and very quickly he backtracked and said it was about some other nonsense. I like the way she holds that microphone, and then he came up with a dumb explanation, and he came under attack for the whole day, and now he's going on vacation, just like Bill O'Reilly. So a long-planned vacation for Jesse Waters. After most places let you start your new job, and then on day 2 take a huge vacation. So he may be out, which would be just fine. And I don't really know. I was interested in seeing whether he was going to hold on because I thought there was a fair chance that that's a sort of joke that Donald Trump would have given him a high five on, to be honest. He says those sorts of things about his daughter all the time, but maybe he feels like it's beneath the dignity of the office somehow for him now to make oral sex jokes about his daughter. I'm not really sure. Anyway, I won't ask him. It won't matter. Greg Dworkin is here, and it's time to get... Oh, here's the answer. Rebecca Roman says Jesse Waters was added to the cast of the 5. So I guess it's back down to the 4, or it was the 6 yesterday, and it's the 5 again this morning. Hey, Greg, how you doing?
I'm
Busy
fine,
day.
thank you. I pointed out the other day that actually the 9, who now ride flying things instead of riding black horses, were demoted by Mordor down to the 5, so that the 6 could be on at 4. And it's really hard to keep track of what's going on at Fox News if you don't really use a Mordor analogy. But the point really is that Donald Trump can get away with a whole bunch of stuff, that the exact same line, the exact same attitude cannot be done by some Donald Trump wannabe. And a lot of people are finding this out.
Yes, well, he's got a bit of a magical power in that respect.
And you know what that magical power is, according
not.
to Tom Nichols, conservative elitist?
No.
Trump voters are really stupid.
Oh.
He's got this really interesting article, Are Trump Voters Ruining America for All of Us Today? It's in USA Today. And he says, listen, those of us who criticize Trump voters for their angry populism are often told during and after the election not to condescend to our fellow citizens and to respect their choices.
Yeah, please.
This is fair. In a democracy, every vote counts equally, and the president won an impressive and legitimate electoral victory. Even so, the unwillingness of so many of his supporters to hold him to even a minimal standard of accountability means that a certain amount of condescension from the rest of us is unavoidable. In every election, we must respect the value of each vote. We are never required to assume that each vote was cast with equal probity or intelligence. That's
true.
Yeah, so I'm okay with that.
All right, I'm good with that too. I have a story I'll tell later, which will end all respect for Trump voters.
Right. I'm just going to mention in passing
yes.
that there was a interesting, because there's a 3-part Trump voter series here, and then maybe if Armando can't come on, I can talk about some of his wonderful tweet storm that he did.
Oh.
But Center for Politics did their own poll, taking a temperature of Trump voters at the 100-day mark, and like most other pollsters, they find that half of the Trump supporters, actually 42%, strongly approve, and 51% somewhat approve. This is of Trump voters who give him an approval rating of 93%. Just making the point that there are two groups. There are two baskets of Trump supporters. And some are deplorable and love everything he does. And then there's a bunch of others who are not quite in that category. It's just a good reminder.
Okay.
And then finally, perhaps more interesting, because that's stuff we already knew. This is from Ron Brownstein. And he writes a really interesting piece about the Democratic Party and trying to reconcile the Bernie vision and the centrist vision.
Oh.
That is to say, do you try to consolidate the 55% of people who can't stand Trump? Or do you try to win back some of the Trump voters who might have been white middle class and perhaps voted for Obama? And it's very difficult to do both strategies at the same time, but probably necessary, he says, which I totally agree with. But they're different. And if you want to abandon the white working class voters and only get the non-Trump voters, the millennials, people of color, so on and so forth, you have to realize it's difficult, and Clinton failed at doing it. You can say it's because she was a failed candidate, or you can say it's a failed strategy, and that's the discussion, and I think it's a really worthwhile one to have.
It is a tough one. And I don't know what kind of... I don't know about the quality of the data that we've got on it, just because, I think Clinton, the old Clinton, generally speaking, I would think, leans toward... naturally, well, maybe it's Bill that does this, gravitates naturally towards let me court the white working class voters.
Yes.
Whereas the new progressive Clinton, and maybe Hillary personally more so than Bill, might feel very differently about it and say, no, let's just lock down the non-Trump voters. Or certainly, that was the strategy that was put forward. And I don't know if it was a good match. So it might be that, the believer in one strategy can't really execute the other one.
Right. And as a matter of fact, Armando dealt with this in his tweet storm, so I'm going to read it for you in case he wants to come on and talk about it. He doesn't have to do his whole tweet storm. I'll do it for him. So it says, when it comes to Trump supporters unflagging support for Trump, no one wants to deal with what is staring them in the face. What campaign message has Trump not abandoned? Yes, it's the bigotry, stupid. Trump has taken not one step back on his message of bigotry. He's failed in every conceivable way and proven time and time he is unfit, unstable, ignorant, and a liar. But he's been true to his bigotry. Not one step back from that, and Trump's approval among white no college remains rock solid. This is important for determining Dem's strategy going forward, and I'll remind again how Bill Clinton garnered highest percentage of white working class by a Dem since the Civil Rights Act. He felt their pain, not just economic pain, their cultural pain. If Dems don't have something for the cultural pain, there's not much gain in that segment. That won't come from dissatisfaction with Trump. What could lead to that? Wait for it. Economic anxiety. A bad economy is how Trump can lose white working class. Not sure anything else will work. And so he reminds us how Bill Clinton, with Sister Soldier moments and reforming welfare, was able to get white working class voters. There are things that ought to appeal to them. There are things that Obama was able to do to get them, and that's important. But at the same time, you could argue that was a one-off because it happened to be in the middle of such a big recession that normally resistant to Democrat votes and outreach voters were willing to at least consider it. There's a lot mixed into that, and I think it's a wonderful and complex discussion that we'll be having over the next year until 2018.
Oh, well, at least
I think it's a lot more interesting than whether or not John Ossoff is a progressive.
Okay. Bill says, here in a twist, we don't have to wait for Armando. Well, Armando can't say you're wrong because this is his tweet storm, so Bill will do it.
Oh.
Comey.
Well, that's the thing, right? And so what I was going to add, because Bill's
You're
right.
always
What if
that.
Comey hadn't done this and Clinton had won? Would you be having the same discussion?
No, though you would technically need to. I mean, the numbers.
Yes, you would technically need to. I think it's a great discussion to have, but no, you wouldn't, because once you win, everything worked perfectly, and the losers had the worst possible campaign ever in existence.
That is true. And a reminder.
And people write books about it.
Not only were there not very many percentage points separating the two, but she won.
Yeah, exactly. So I'm going to steal some time from my normal discussion of interesting stories in the headlines in politics. And we have a very, very loyal reader and listener who asked some questions which I thought were great, because representing Mr. and Mrs. America and all the ships at sea, it's important to go over some stuff that turns out to have important political ramifications.
Oh, no.
And that's why I wrote you in advance saying I had some technical issues that I needed to turn to an expert to. And I'm going to try to explain it in layman's terms, because I only understand it in layman's terms.
All right,
but why is it important? Well,
yeah.
They're trying to pass a new version, the American Healthcare Act, ACHA 3.0. And one of the provisions tucked into it is this little piece here that says that Congress itself is exempt from anything that they're trying to foist on the American people.
Yes.
And whereas Democrats look at that and say typical Republicans, policy experts, and procedural rules experts say, no, that's actually necessary. Because if you don't do that, then you can't pass the bill according to the Byrd Rule and reconciliation. And most of the rest of us said, what? What does that mean? So I thought that given, on the one hand, we also have questions about such things as what's the difference between a 10-year tax cut and a permanent tax cut? Well, it has to do with reconciliation. And why did the Republicans throw in this weird proviso that their own people are exempt from what they're trying to do? Yeah. That has to do with reconciliation. So I thought, you know what? Can I talk a little bit about reconciliation and the Byrd Rule and what the heck's going on with all of this?
Yes, and if you can, then you know it.
Yeah, that's right. Exactly right, and that's the purpose of doing it. So, what's the question? Well, first of all, what's reconciliation in the first place?
Yes.
As I understand it, the simplest explanation is that reconciliation is a process whereby you can pass things relatively quickly, and I emphasize relatively quickly in the Senate, and do it by a bare majority and not have to worry about a filibuster.
That is true.
And if you do that, then it has to follow certain rules, and some of these have been codified by Robert Byrd, and therefore it's called the Byrd Rule.
Yes.
So one of the things about the Byrd Rule, it says basically, if you want to do it by reconciliation, then it pretty much has to be revenue neutral for like 10 years.
Yes.
And if it's beyond that, then it doesn't fall under reconciliation according to the Byrd Rule, and therefore that's the difference between a tax that lasts 10 years and a tax that lasts forever.
Yes.
If you don't use the Byrd Rule in reconciliation, you can pass a permanent tax cut anytime you want to, but that would be subject to a filibuster.
Right.
If you do it by the Byrd Rule and reconciliation, then you can do it by a bare majority, but you may have to say, okay, but it's only for 10 years, because if you do it beyond, you could do it beyond 10 years, but that would require wisdom, insight, and depth of understanding to prove that it's revenue neutral over a time frame that is very difficult to project over.
Yes, all of that
right?
is.
Did I get that right?
Yes, all of that is essentially true. For clarification, I would say that it's the Budget Act of 1974 that establishes the reconciliation procedure, and the rules for the use of reconciliation include what became known as the Byrd Rule, which was codified as part of the Budget Act. Yeah, I mean, it's that's just the technical clarification of at what points in the process do these various issues come up. But yeah, the reconciliation offers you a chance to do something without having to worry about the filibuster, and that special reward of not having to worry about the filibuster comes at the price of making certain that the proposal brought to the floor at least complies with that part of the Budget Act, which became known as the Byrd Rule. In other words, if you want the special access to the no filibuster procedure, you got to be bringing something that is, first of all, revenue neutral, isn't going to add to the deficit, and in addition, has to be very narrowly tailored and relevant to, and this is the important part for today's discussion, to a specific set of instructions given and agreed to ahead of time in the budget resolution for the upcoming fiscal year. The Congress, both houses, have to agree that reconciliation isn't, open microphone. Whatever you got, bring it here, and as long as it's revenue neutral, we'll allow it in. That's the thing that usually causes the most problems. Today's problem, apparently, is caused by the fact that you have to say ahead of time, one, a savings target. How much money are you going to save in the budget approximately? And that can be general. You can do more, but you had to do a minimum. And so what you usually do is you got to save $1 million because that's easy to do, apparently, in government. So you just exceed it. But then you have to say which committees, which authorizing committees are you going to ask to make these changes and save this money? And you're not allowed to then say, oh, I had another idea for saving some money, but that belongs to the jurisdiction of another committee. No, if it's not in a budget resolution, initially you're not supposed to have them touch that bill, and they're not entitled to protection from the filibuster under reconciliation.
Right, and hugely important. Now I'm going to turn to Wikipedia here under the Byrd Rule and just read. The Byrd Rule defines a provision to be extraneous and therefore ineligible to reconciliation in 6 cases. So keep on, not David, who's an expert in this, but for those listeners who are just new to a lot of this.
I got to listen.
Keep in mind that when House members and especially Senate members start throwing around the term extraneous, it actually has meaning here. And it's extraneous and therefore ineligible to reconciliation in 6 specific cases. If it doesn't produce a change in outlays of revenue, in other words, you can't use reconciliation to do bathroom bills.
Yes, right.
It's got to be about money.
Right. It's not just policy. No policy making.
No policy. It's got to be money. Number 2, if it produces an outlay increase or revenue decrease when the instructed committee is not in compliance with its instructions. That's what David was saying. You got to follow the committee rules, and those rules have to be done in advance. And number 3, and this is the important one for the healthcare part, if it's outside the jurisdiction of the committee that submitted the title or provision for inclusion in the reconciliation measure. Number 4, if it produces a change, and we're going to get back to that, if it produces a change in outlays or revenues which is merely incidental to the non-budgetary components of the provision. Number 5, if it would increase the deficit for a fiscal year beyond those covered by the reconciliation measure through the provision in question may receive an exception if they total in other words, no balloon payments here.
And that's the 10-year window thing.
Yeah. But number 6, if it recommends changes in Social Security. Social Security is permanently off the table for reconciliation.
Everyone should remember that. Donald Trump.
I forget that at times, but that's good to remember.
Yeah, they never touch that because it's so explicit, and Social Security, third rail, etc. No one's ever really challenged that, but one day it'll come up, and probably during the Trump administration.
Now, this is another question for David down the road. So, okay, it's reconciliation and we're going to just pass it by bare majority, but any senator can raise a procedural objection if you are raising a provision believed to be extraneous, and then the presiding officer rules on it with the advice of the parliamentarian. So in other words, can they just get rid of the filibuster here too if they feel like it eventually because they decided that they just said, no, it's okay?
Yes, in a manner of speaking, yeah. If you can either convince a parliamentarian that this simply isn't extraneous, or simply doesn't exceed the 10-year budget window, or simply does fall within the jurisdiction of thus and such a committee, or you simply want to rule in contravention of what the parliamentarian tells you, you can probably engineer it. Usually, I mean, it makes it difficult if you rule, depending on how you decide to overrule the parliamentarian. Very often, there also would be required a 60-vote threshold to either overturn the ruling of the chair if a correct ruling is given, but there's no protection if the chair is willing to give an incorrect ruling. So
right. So there are technical ways that you could get around this in theory, at least, and get rid of this 60-vote rule.
Yes, because...
And no, I wouldn't even be asking this, except we just saw what happened with the Supreme Court.
Right. That is true. Yeah, so if you're willing to play by the rules, it does make things very difficult if you want to bring in extraneous material. And that definition has wavered and changed, not necessarily under threat of firing the parliamentarian, but also, yeah, that threat does tend to change minds too.
Right. So let's just assume for the moment. No, I mean, it's for the moment, it's the rule that you need 60 votes. And yeah, you could change it, but it would be really hard to do.
Yes.
Okay. So now, it seems pretty clear to a layman like myself who doesn't understand the law or tax policy that the difference between having a 10-year tax plan and a permanent tax plan is whether or not you can get it through reconciliation. And a permanent tax plan, which is to say tax reform, is much more difficult to do because you got to get past the filibuster. So that when you attempt this at all, if you attempt this at all, you're going to try to do it by reconciliation and see if you can get a bare majority to agree with you. Does that make sense?
Right.
Okay, that's straightforward for tax policy. What's that got to do with health care?
I don't know.
Well, number 3 of the Byrd Rule says if it's outside the jurisdiction of a committee that submitted the title or provision for inclusion, then it's extraneous. So if it turned out, I guess, that you wanted to apply all of the new rules for the American Health Care Act 3.0 to Congress, applying it to Congress was not covered in the committees that marked up this stuff. And so if you say, well, look, we'll get around that and not get into a Byrd committee violation by simply deeming that, I love that word, I'm not sure I'm using it right, deeming that the Congress itself is exempt, then you don't have to worry about it being a Byrd Rule violation. Yeah, that looks terrible politically. It looks like we're trying to say better for thee than me, but at least I don't have to deal with a Byrd Rule violation and have to worry about the whole thing getting scuttled because of it.
Yes.
And that seems to be the reason why it got in there.
Yeah. Well, that's the most convincing explanation that I have seen, besides they're extraordinarily greedy and selfish and worried about their own coverage, but hate all the rest of the country. Which
well, they saw it as a win-win. But yeah. I think the reason that it came up is that, look, this is what we want to do. We want to exempt ourselves, but we have to, because otherwise it's going to violate the Byrd Rule.
It also explains last night's rather pathetic declaration that all of them are opposed to this exemption, but they're going to fix it later with a standalone bill to unexempt themselves, but they won't simply do it in this bill. And
yes.
One explanation for that is, no, they aren't going to. They're just saying that. And the other explanation is, yeah, they really do want to do that, but they can't fix it now because if it does, it ruins the whole amendment that is the whole reason that they're back here for a third try in the first place.
And that's a huge point. You see, the whole reason that the House Freedom Caucus is willing to do this is scuttling those things. So you can't say, okay, well then don't do that. You're not in violation of the Byrd Rule. But if you do that, then the conservatives won't vote for it. So again, Donald Trump was right when he said, gee, this is really complicated.
Yes.
Even procedure in passing it is really complicated.
Mm-hmm.
And, so I don't know this stuff the way you do, and I just saw some of this, and that Brian Beutler discussion with Sarah Binder and other experts was fascinating, and I just thought I'd bring it to the table here.
Did Sarah Binder make it in that one? I didn't see.
Yeah, just a quick comment.
All right.
But, I mean, look, if she's paying attention, this must be important, I thought to myself.
Okay.
So that's why I did, because, frankly, a lot of it was over my head.
And here's I guess this is the question here. Karen is asking, what about MacArthur Amendment and the Byrd Rule? And I think that, the MacArthur Amendment is what we're talking about, isn't it?
Yeah, I think so.
I don't even remember what's in what, but the only change that made the Republican bill supposedly viable again that I'm aware of, and I think I haven't read, am I sure that this is the MacArthur Amendment? My understanding is the MacArthur Amendment is this state opt-out provision that states can opt out of the provisions that prevent insurance companies in their
raising their rates,
from raising their
community
rates
rating. So it opts out. States can opt out,
etc. Right.
of having to worry about pre-existing conditions.
Now, the jurisdictional issue
and the essential health benefits, and that therefore would make it cheaper.
Right. So this is basically the MacArthur Amendment is the legislative language that says, why doesn't somebody just make it so that states can opt out? And everybody said, yeah, I mean, that would make a great deal of sense. That creates a number of other problems, including when are we ever going to get to that whole erasing state lines thing that we were promised in the third or fourth round of the health? So now we're on to the sixth or seventh round of healthcare tinkering. And I'm not sure what that does to that, just because, okay, if my state now opts out and I can't afford coverage for my pre-existing conditions and then they erase state lines, can I just buy it in another state? And when I do, who regulates that insurance? My insurance commissioner or their insurance commissioner? And
right. So basically, to summarize quickly, you'd say, okay, well, basically the MacArthur Amendment redefines waiver requirements.
Yes.
And Tim Jost has a nice summary in the Health Affairs blog of exactly what that is, so I included that right at the end here if you want to explore that, or if the readers do when Scott Anderson summarizes the show later. The MacArthur Amendment language, race in the federal exchange, and risk adjustment coefficients. A lot of technical stuff. But the bottom line is that in order to get this done, you have to allow states to have a lot of leeway about waivers. And in order to do that, you have to get it past the Senate. In order to do that, you have to use reconciliation, and it's got to be okay with the Byrd Rule. And in order to do that, Congress has to be exempt. And that's really why all this happened.
Yeah, the part where it becomes a little hazy, but we'll explain, okay, why does Congress have to be exempt, is the jurisdiction issues. And I guess the missing part of our discussion so far, but it's a part of Brian Beutler's discussion, which we'll have to link to, I guess, is, well, why is this a jurisdictional problem? And as it turns out, and this is where it seems a little bit backwards, but and here is where really stupid things happen. Who defines the jurisdictions of the committees? And why are they what they are? Because apparently, in order to grant the ability of states to opt out, that brings things out of the jurisdiction, believe it or not, of the Health, Education, Labor, and Pensions Committee, and outside of the jurisdiction of the Senate Finance Committee, and believe it or not, into, I guess, the jurisdiction of the Homeland Security and Governmental Affairs Committee. Governmental Affairs is the trip up here. And if I guess without the exemption of Congress and staff,
then it falls. I mean, according to the stuff that Brian Beutler and others dug up, this is Eric Wasson. Says a provision that is not in the jurisdiction of the committee with jurisdiction over said title or provision shall be considered extraneous.
And
as Brian Beutler points out, this is insanely arcane stuff.
Yes.
And Beutler says, I'm guessing many senators are just as confused as the journals. For what it's worth, this is the issue. If you don't exempt Congress, the jurisdictional point of order will strike the entire waiver section.
Yes. Now, why?
You're asking why. I'm not totally sure there either, but I take his word for it that it's what.
Well, the reason why it would strike the entire provision is, I mean, it runs into what you were reading before, number 3, I guess, on your list. I guess my question is, why is the waiver provision under the jurisdiction of the Homeland Security and Governmental Affairs Committee rather than the Health Committee or possibly even the Finance Committee? And what is it about adding an exemption for Congress that brings the state waivers back under the jurisdiction of the two named committees? And the Finance and Help Committee are the people you would expect to be dealing with this, and more importantly, those are the committees named in the budget resolution as having been given reconciliation instructions.
Right.
But yeah, I don't know what's...
So I don't have the answer to this. I don't expect you to have the answer to this. It may be that at some point somebody has the answer to this, but clearly they don't know the answer to this. And this is one of the things that would bring it up as a point of order and perhaps scuttle the whole thing. It's really embarrassing when you bring something up in the Senate like this, and somebody says, as a point of order, I actually read the rules and they're in violation of the rules, and everybody else says, I don't know what you're talking about.
Yeah.
I don't even know what you mean. I know what you mean now. I'm not sure. We're going to pass it anyway, even though we're not sure. Well, you can't do that. Let's talk to the parliamentarian about it. And then you find out that you didn't even have it right, and then the whole thing gets scuttled. Nobody wants to be in that situation.
Yeah. I mean, it seems
so you have to settle it before you go.
Yeah. You don't want to be surprised by that on the day of, although they do that in the House quite frequently.
Yeah, but that's the difference between the House and the Senate.
Yes. Well, that's true. They don't like to be caught by surprise. They do
it in the House all the time, because what happens is then right before the vote, they realize they don't have the vote and they just pull the bill altogether.
Yes, they can do that, or they can very easily waive the rules in the House. And that's why you may yet see this, and for that matter, the tax bill pass the House, but not the Senate. And I don't know whether Trump will count that as a win, passing one House. I know that a lot of people think, well, maybe there's some hope if we can pass something in the House, we can then bring pressure on the Senate to take that thing up, even if they don't want to, because there's been momentum. But that hasn't worked historically. But there are other procedures that makes possible, like bringing up an amended version of the House bill in the Senate and then handing it back to the House, either in conference or just handing the bill back and saying, this is the version that can pass the Senate. Anything else will be filibustered, so I suggest you pass this version instead, which is slightly less terrible. And the House may swallow that just to get a win on the books.
Right.
And you get a semi-terrible bill instead.
As I'm reading the experts and trying to understand this, it seems to me that the issue here, in terms of the Byrd rule, is that if any part of a section is in violation of the Byrd rule, the whole section goes down. There's other situations where the entire bill goes down, like in Social Security. Yes. So the idea is that if the waivers have nothing to do with Homeland Security, but congressional staffers have something to do with Homeland Security, then it's their committee and their jurisdiction. And so for whatever reason, if you haven't included the right committee in marking up the bill, then it goes down. And if it goes down, that whole section goes down, even if it has nothing to do with waivers. And if the waivers go down, then the conservatives bolt.
Yes. The thing that I will have to straighten out probably later on is it seems to me like the jurisdiction issue may have been read backwards in this, or so I assume I have read it backwards in this. But like the House or the Senate Homeland Security Committee would appear to me to have jurisdiction over the congressional waiver and not the rest of it. But
yes. And that's enough to bring down the whole thing.
I guess.
You don't have to worry about the rest of the waivers.
All right.
If you didn't get the congressional waiver part of it right, then the whole thing goes down.
In which case, but if that's the case, then you just take the congressional waiver out and the rest of it survives, and you're back to where common sense.
But then it applies to the Congress, and then you didn't do it right.
Oh, I suppose. Well, I guess if you've then changed congressional coverage without involving.
Yeah, I mean, it's like I decided in my office to change how I pay my staff, but I forgot to talk to HR.
Okay.
I mean, you can't just do that.
That is true. All right. Well, that could explain. I thought they were trying to say that there's some material in there that was referred to the wrong committee, and I guess what it really is it was just never referred to the right committee.
Yeah. In other words, they never really thought it through.
Oh, well, that's a surprise.
Because this committee over here can change everything for the American people, but you can't just change congressional staffing. Yes. That's that committee over there.
I guess
so
what
if
makes
you didn't involve that committee over there, the whole thing falls apart.
It's even funnier, I guess, if you stop to think, okay, so if the upshot of this is your simple solution of the MacArthur Amendment simply allows states to opt out, gets screwed up because it forgot to take into account the members of Congress and staff who are using state exchanges.
Yes.
Why are members of Congress and staff using state exchanges? That was your dumb idea. You thought it was going to embarrass Democrats into not passing Obamacare, and they said, oh, actually, it's kind of dumb, but we're willing. Sure. That takes away that issue from you. And then they said, oh, I guess we will then. Fine.
Stuck with it,
and
right?
Now they're stuck with it, and now it's screwing them up. If they had just shut up and not tried to win that stupid point for nothing, then they wouldn't have this problem to deal with in the first place, and this would go through.
Right. And so Brian Beutler sums up, and again, thanks, Dan, for having this whole discussion. So the danger to the waivers is very real, and without the waivers, HFC bolts.
Yeah, there's nothing in it. It's just we're back to 2.0 without the waivers.
Yeah.
They just said they hated that. That's going to be interesting, though. I think you might see members of the House Freedom Caucus simply say, oh, no, I wanted that, but it's not fatal. Take it out. I'll vote for this anyway. But you said you were a hell no on this last week. Different week.
Right. It was a different week because this week, really, it's the end of the 100 days. And what they're really trying to say is we will pass anything, no matter how bad, under the assumption that it'll go to the Senate and die. And then we can point to the Senate and say, their fault, not our fault. Leave us alone. We're good.
Yep.
And that's about the level of commitment.
I guess so. That's the principle at stake here. And now it's even it's just that much more entertaining when you think about the fact that their insistence on including Congress in this just put 1,000 rakes down for them to step on later on.
Exactly, and they're stepping on them one by one by one by one. It's really very interesting.
Amazing.
That is my technical summary for today. I hope it wasn't too technical, but I needed to pick David's brain to really understand this. But I think, again, you have to understand the whole reason to understand a little bit about the Byrd Rule and reconciliation is you need to understand it, at least basically, to understand what they're doing on tax reform and why they're trying this. But you also need to understand it basically in terms of why it's a little bit more difficult than the House thought to just go ahead and repeal and replace.
Yeah, just do it.
It's technically very difficult.
It is. And although it doesn't have anything to do with the fact that Democrats used reconciliation to facilitate passage last time, it should remind you that nobody really wanted to use that last time. They wanted to just pass it straight up. And it created a lot more headaches than they were hoping for. And now you're finding out what those headaches are.
Right.
That's great. Well, that makes for a good story.
Right. Now, again, I'm going to thank everybody for indulging me and sign off by saying this is Greg Dworkin speaking to my good friend David Waldman. Kagro in the morning. We love to talk about this stuff. We're really interested in it. This is a show I thought David would find interesting. I am hoping the rest of you found it interesting too.
Hello?
But it's awfully interesting stuff.
Anybody there? Yeah, I thought so. And I hope the rest of you did too. And it actually ended up finally clarifying things for me. I went into this reading Beutler's discussion and saying, yeah, but I don't understand why anybody called the Homeland Security Committee. And the answer is they didn't, and they should have, and they forgot that they were going to have to, and therefore never named them in the reconciliation because they didn't see this amendment coming, and they blew it.
Right.
Great.
Wonderful. So thanks so much again. And I will remind our listeners, this is the kind of stuff that you only hear on this show. And you know what? I think it's kind of important. I think it's kind of interesting. And it's going to turn out that for the rest of, for what Republicans are going to try to do, it's going to come up again.
Yeah,
the whole idea of following process is going to come up. We've seen that since the primaries. The whole idea of understanding reconciliation and the filibuster are going to come up. There's a side piece here about whether you can even get rid of the filibuster for something like this. And, I just feel like our listeners are going to be a lot more educated about it now.
I hope so. They'll
thanks for indulging.
Very educated in the next nuclear option.
Yeah, and we even threw in a good Armando tweet storm. So take care, and you'll be back tomorrow, but I'll be back on Monday.
All right. Terrific. Have a good weekend.
All right. Take care.
All right. You do the same. And did everybody get that? I'm just barely now up to speed. But, I guess the shortest recap I can give to that is, well, for one thing, the admonition, this is why it took as long as it took to get healthcare, the Affordable Care Act, done in Congress last time, despite the fact that Republicans insisted this was brought up by surprise. You rammed it down our throats. Blah, 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 blah. You couldn't have gotten all of this detail taken care of in such a short amount of time. And certainly you can't do it, over dinner on the back of a napkin, nor can you do taxes this way, which we're finding out at the same time, amazingly enough. But yeah, you can't, why doesn't somebody just your way out of this one? And the most hilarious thing about it, I think, is that this situation was set up by a Republican during the passage of the Affordable Care Act, thinking he could trip up Democrats politically with an amendment that didn't embarrass them in the least. That's probably one of the most amazing things about it. And then, of course, the fact that it was such a huge issue and everybody remembers it, and then it comes back to haunt you this way, to literally bite you in, I guess not literally bite you in the ass. I suppose that would be too much to ask. But it's really pretty fascinating just all around. I don't know. I mean, what else can we say about it? I guess so. It's just, I guess, a good lesson in why you can't just say, why don't we just do this thing and pass it? Now, I guess all of this goes to waste. We might as well explain the nuclear way out of this, if there really is one, just in case they go that way. And I have a feeling that they won't bother. I mean, the Senate at this point, Senate Republicans, as loyal as some of them are to Trump, most of them just really kind of aren't. Not just because he's Trump. They're just not loyal to anybody but themselves, period. So they're not particularly interested in carrying a Republican president, even if it was a former senator. They don't give a damn. So, not a great deal of reason to believe that they would go nuclear to save this thing. They'd probably, at this point, they're used to just saying, it's a flop. Trump never knew what he was talking about. Screw it. We're done. This wasn't our plan. This was just something we scrambled to try to come up with. If we can save this thing and do the president a favor and score some political points, fine. If we can't, forget about it. But if they decided they wanted to go nuclear, how could they do it? Okay, so you have this jurisdictional issue that would cause this tremendous problem. What do you do with it? Well, one thing you can do with it is you can get the parliamentarian to say, I don't think this is an extraneous matter, or I don't think this is a jurisdictional issue. I disagree that the Homeland Security Committee has jurisdiction over the healthcare policy with respect to members of Congress and their staff. Now, that would be a facial lie, and I'll tell you why. Just by taking a quick look at the jurisdiction and rules of the Committee on Homeland Security and Government Affairs. That's the hang up on this. We all forget about that part of it, but that probably, if you heard that, if that opened your ears, it'll also open your eyes. Oh, I see. I could see how this comes in. There's a lot of blah, 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 which is, of course, the main jurisdiction of the Homeland Security Committee. You know it. Jurisdiction over Homeland Security. But also, the governmental affairs extends this way, right? They also have jurisdiction to evaluate the effects of laws enacted to reorganize the legislative and executive branches of government, and study the intergovernmental relationships between the U.S. and states and municipalities, and between the U.S. and international organizations, of which the U.S. is a member. So, okay, a beginning entry into this, it becomes a little bit clearer. But, for instance, does changing your health care benefits count as reorganizing the legislative and or executive branches of government? Well, not executive, but legislative? That's kind of tough. Well, what about other parts of it? What about the waivers idea? What about the opt-outs? What about the fact that federal employees, members of Congress, and their staff are buying their insurance through exchanges in the states? Does that count as the intergovernmental relationship between the U.S. and states and municipalities? Oh, arguably. But there's still more and better. Among the committee's governmental affairs responsibilities, we'll skip down to the third paragraph of jurisdictions and rules. Among the committee's governmental affairs responsibilities are the archives of the United States. That's not it. Budgeting and accounting measures generally. Okay, that seems interesting. Government contracting. Not so much. The census and collection of statistics. No, but also worth noting when the census next comes up. Congressional organization. Maybe. The Federal Civil Service. Okay, possibly, even though, all right, well, they're not civil service employees anymore necessarily, but members of Congress, or rather the staff. Government information. Who even knows what that means anymore, but no, not really. Intergovernmental relations. Yeah. The Municipal Affairs of the District of Columbia. No, not it. The Organization and Management of U.S. Nuclear Export Policy. No, though I understand why that would be a Homeland Security issue, I suppose. But, okay. The Organization and Reorganization of the Executive Branch. Not that. The Postal Service. No. And the status of officers and employees of the U.S., including their classification. No. Compensation. Oh, maybe. And benefits. Yes, that's it. Okay. The kick is up and it's good. The Homeland Security Committee has jurisdiction over the classification, compensation, and benefits of officers and employees of the United States. That's them. That's the thing we're talking about. Now, the committee also receives and examines reports of the Comptroller General of the United States and submits recommendations to the Senate as it sees fit related to the subject matter of the reports. But that's neither here nor there. The key is right there. There it is, buried in the jurisdiction and rules section of the Homeland Security and Governmental Affairs Committee of the Senate. So, could a parliamentarian rule that the Homeland Security Committee simply doesn't have jurisdiction over the regulation of benefits that are part of the compensation package of employees of the United States, officers and employees of the United States? That would be that you just have to lie and say, I don't see it. And they could do that. They could, and the Senate could tell their parliamentarian, if you don't say that, we'll fire you and hire someone else who will. That can happen. That has happened. So ordinarily, the parliamentarians say, yeah, you're just going to have to find somebody else. I would rather not be parliamentarian than do that. And they find somebody else who doesn't care why they're parliamentarian, and they do it. Another way of, and by the way, then they would rule, and then the presiding officer would say, with respect to the senator's point of order that there's a jurisdictional problem that violates the Byrd rule, the answer is no, there isn't. And the senator would say, that's ridiculous. I just read it. There totally is. I appeal the ruling of the chair. And then the majority leader would say, I move to table the appeal of the ruling of the chair. There would be a vote, and a simple majority voting in favor of tabling the appeal of the ruling would prevail, and then you would no longer have an appeal of the ruling pending, and therefore all that's left standing is the ruling, and they go forward. The ruling is, the presiding officer says, no jurisdictional issue, let's get to our vote. You could do things that way. You could theoretically have, if the parliamentarian simply won't rule the way you want, and you fire her and hire a new one, and they also won't do it. If you can't find anyone in America who will do this, for some reason, or you just don't want to bother, you really like the parliamentarian, you know she's not going to go for it, but she's good on everything else, she's with you on everything except the war on benefits, you just say, all right, how about if the chair simply ignores the advice of the parliamentarian and rules, though the parliamentarian says, no way, I say, yes way, or as they say, way, as they did in Wayne's World. And then at that point, now, against the advice of the parliamentarian, the chair rules there is no jurisdictional problem. Then again, you can have the objecting senators raise an objection to that and say, I appeal the ruling of the chair. And once again, you just go through the same tabling issue. The other thing that can happen is that the chair can say, well, the parliamentarian says there is a jurisdictional problem. And anybody with eyes that work, anyway, can see that the rule is very plain, that the Homeland Security Committee should have had jurisdiction over this and doesn't, or didn't get its chance to exercise jurisdiction over it because, ordinarily, again, if this were just regular legislation, one, the Homeland Security Committee could have had a markup on this and said, yeah, we're good with that. That's how we want it done. Or if it were getting to the floor and they hadn't had their shot at it because of jurisdictional issues, you could recommit it to the Homeland Security Committee to give them a chance to do that. Or you could vote to discharge the Homeland Security Committee from any further consideration of this piece of legislation that was under their jurisdiction. You can get around that with regular legislation. However, the rules are pretty clear. If you want the protection from the filibuster that reconciliation provides, reconciliation says that at the start of this process, you have to tell me up front which committees you're going to use. And you didn't say Homeland Security. You could have, you should have. And as a matter of fact, maybe the lesson coming away from things like this is, I guess I would simply write every budget to say, I hereby direct every single committee we've got to save $1. And then, I guess that would cover you. Because I don't know whether, I'm trying to think of how I guess if you're named and you don't report anything, that would cause a problem. But I guess you could report a pro forma amendment that saves $1 somewhere. It should be, I don't know. So I suppose you could run into all kinds of trouble with that too. But basically, if you have any inkling whatsoever that you're going to need the participation of a certain committee, you should be including them. They just didn't have this inkling because this MacArthur amendment just came up like last week. Maybe the idea of allowing states to opt out of things in general has been around a long time. But I guarantee that what it was that they forgot about was themselves. They forgot that Congress was covered by Obamacare and everybody had to buy their insurance through the exchanges, even though the rest of the federal government doesn't. They all get their coverage through the, Federal Employees Benefit, FEHBP, Federal Employees Health Benefits Plan. And staff from Congress used to get it that way too, and it was only this smart ass, I'll show you amendment the first time around with the Affordable Care Act that changed that. Had they left that alone, this bill would be on its way to the floor under reconciliation. That is really rather amazing. Anyway, I guess the last option that was available to them as a nuclear option would be for the Senate presiding officer to hear from the parliamentarian that this doesn't pass muster and to rule as such. And then McConnell could say, well, I appeal the ruling of the chair, like they did with the filibuster rule, which is under slightly different circumstances, right? So he simply says, I appeal the ruling of the chair, and then they have a vote, and it only takes a bare majority to overrule the chair on a straight-up question of procedural rules, except that when it comes to things like reconciliation, when it comes to overruling the chair on a ruling where, on subject matter where there's also a built-in supermajority either by statute or usually by Senate rules as well, with certain exceptions, but particularly with Budget Act. The Budget Act has built into it, along with the Byrd Rule, lots of procedural points of order that can, and the Byrd rule is basically a collection of those procedural points of order. These are things that senators can do to say there's something technically wrong with this bill and we either have to fix it or eliminate it from the bill, whether that's it has extraneous material in it or it doesn't have a budgetary impact or it exceeds the 10-year window or it touches Social Security, right? All of these things these are the things that are set aside that senators have the right to object to. And those rules also include waiver possibilities. And it's basically like a built-in filibuster in itself. In other words, if something has extraneous material in it and you know it and you're honest about it and you don't want to pull any tricks, then you can say, all right, but if there's the will to do this anyway, if I really do have agreement across the aisle that I'd like to do this thing, in other words, if you have a provision in the bill that really is, why doesn't somebody just XYZ to the bill? It is possible to do, but you got to have generalized agreement on it. If you have 60 votes to waive the point of order, you can do it. That's the way the rule is written. There's a point of order and it can be waived, but only by 60 votes. Well, similarly, the rule also says setting aside or overruling the chair's correct upholding of the point of order likewise requires 60 votes. If it didn't say that in the rule, I mean, Robert Byrd was smart enough to realize that this could happen. He wrote it accordingly, and he got lots of agreement across the aisle because it's the only way the rule makes any sense. That if you're going to have special protection from reconciliation in exchange for insisting that the bill basically reduce the deficit or at least not explode it outside of the scoring window, people are going to try and monkey with that. As soon as they see that it's protected from the filibuster, they're going to try to do whatever they can to get their special pet project through. And if it's not got widespread support, it's going to cause a problem. But if it does have widespread support and someone says, why don't they just change the rules so that XYZ? And everybody says, yeah, why don't they? We really should. But we're operating under reconciliation, and so it's kind of difficult. And that does make good sense. So we could come back later and try to pass it. But let's take care of it here and now because it makes sense and we have agreement on both sides of the aisle. Then you have the option of saying, let's waive the rule that would ordinarily exclude this from reconciliation. Oh, no, you don't. You can't just do that. Well, you can. It just takes 60 votes. The same 60 votes it would take to clear a filibuster to do this as a freestanding bill to correct things later. But why wait? We have the 60 votes now. Let's use them. So there is that escape mechanism. But it also prevents you from simply saying, well, why don't we use something like a tactical nuclear weapon in this, a tactical nuclear option, and say, we know that it violates the rules and we don't have the 60 votes to fix it, but we'll simply overrule the parliamentarian or move to table the point of order and do it by a simple majority. That doesn't always work, especially in these situations where they anticipate that and say, no, to overrule the chair in this case requires the same 60 votes it would have required to waive it in the first place. There's no shortcut to it. But what there is a shortcut to is not changing the rules with respect to the threshold necessary to waive a rule, but change the underlying operational rule itself, or the underlying rules or interpretations of the rules of the Senate, rather than changing the Byrd rule, if that makes any sense at all. That probably only confused the issue. But like I said, you can short circuit that as well. If you are willing to simply rule in obvious contravention of the written rules, or you're willing to table just about anything, then you can do it. You can make it work. And it's so complicated looking to the general public that it's likely you might even be able to get away with it just because it's too goddamn confusing. So I guess probably the simplest way to have it work would be can you find somebody who's willing in the public knowledge of the parliamentarians having rejected this thing and some discussion in the newspapers, hopefully, of why it's really not allowed under the rules. And then if you're willing in that atmosphere to simply say, well, everyone can see that this violates the rules, but I'm just going to say it's not, and then go on record voting to support that, then you can get something done. You really could make this work. It's just a question of, does the Senate care enough about this provision or about this bill to do it? And I don't see any indication so far that they do. If this were really a huge Senate priority, and it's not by any means clear that it is, they could make it work, and they could probably even weather the embarrassment of it. But they're not going to try to weather the embarrassment, I don't think, of something they just don't care about, and it doesn't have their name attached to it. Another flop of Trump care? Who cares? I never liked the guy anyway. So, very interesting. Let's see. Here's a note. Stephen Brown, who tweets under the handle of His Honor, Hizzonr. That's some kind of shorthand Twitter spelling for it. That's good Twitter lingo. Says another Republican rake of their own choosing has popped up. The Berg rule effect, like the sanctuary. He's comparing it to yesterday's sanctuary city arguments based on the Affordable Care Act ruling. Yeah, it's very similar. Things that Republicans thought they were scoring huge political points on coming back to haunt them. And that's the rule of law for you. Sometimes things go really well and sometimes they go really poorly. But if they're applied evenly and fairly across the board, for the most part, we're happy about that. Sometimes you win, sometimes you lose. That seems fair. It's when you change the rules every time you start losing that things really start to rub people the wrong way. I think a good comparison there, Stephen. I'll take it. Thanks very much. Okay. Wow. So far, I haven't seen any indication that Armando demands an audience today, but of course the door is open if anything should come up. I haven't caught up with, you know what I noticed? A trend in the Trump administration, stories that spring to life after the show is over and die before the next show begins. That's a very tight news cycle we have going on here. Since we ended yesterday, and hours before we got on the air today, entire scandals have lived and died, and I haven't mentioned them. I mentioned Ivanka Trump at the beginning of the show, but only with respect to Jesse Waters and his filthy mind. But I didn't mention that after we got off the air yesterday, I guess a story coming out of Ivanka's time in Germany. Is she back? Does anybody know? Let's see. Today's Thursday. Jared's going to want her back by tomorrow afternoon. Is Jared with her by any chance? Did he travel with her? I'm not really sure whether he did or didn't, but I had a lot of people pointing out on Twitter this morning that, gosh, it seems like the White House has really gone bonkers in the last day or so. Ivanka's not there. Maybe Jared's with her, and Bannon is running things at the White House again. And that could explain, for instance, how it is that the president said yesterday, or in early afternoon, that's it, we're out of here, NAFTA sucks, I'm terminating NAFTA. And then by the evening was like, well, I talked to the other North Americans, and it turns out that the free trade agreement that they like so much is actually something of a good idea, and we're not going to leave just yet. So I don't even know what he thought was going to come of that one. But another great flip-flop in the matter of hours. There's more, of course. At some point yesterday, when we were busy discussing the Affordable Care Act, or rather the Sanctuary City ruling, even though we were able to explain that really this was conservative opinion at the Supreme Court that cost you this ruling. Trump decided he needed somebody to blame, and I guess Bannon maybe handed him this one and said, here's the thing you got to do. Let's break up the Ninth Circuit. They're too liberal. They're always getting overruled. Everybody knows that the Ninth Circuit is the most overruled circuit there is, and I don't know whether that's actually really true, but they love to bandy about the statistics, and Trump dragged it out yesterday saying something like, you know, they've got an 80% rate of getting overturned by the Supreme Court, the Ninth Circuit, because they're so damn liberal, and they're out of control. We got to do something about them. And one, the statistics that they cite are usually wrong. Two, of course, it's a rather dumb statistic to even cite because, as you may know, maybe from just watching the courts or listening to the show or a little bit of both or just common sense, the Supreme Court doesn't take cases that they're not likely to overrule, generally speaking. I mean, I don't know what the percentage is, but the vast majority of cases decided at the circuit levels, any circuit, they don't go on to the Supreme Court because the Supreme Court doesn't just review everything they do, and you can't just appeal as of right on everything. You got to convince the Supreme Court and more specifically, at least 4 justices of the Supreme Court that there's something really important that needs to be addressed here in order to bring it up. And it may be that they decide we'll bring it up to affirm it. For some reason, they may decide, though, and usually they want to bring it up because they think there's something wrong with it. But the vast majority of cases that are on appeal never make it past the circuit courts. There's just not the capacity and there's not the interest in the Supreme Court to do it. So all cases taken up from the Ninth Circuit, or any circuit for that matter, to the Supreme Court are cases that 4 justices think there's something significant that needs to be said about it. So that's a very self-selecting group to begin with, in addition to which the stats are that they're really not reversed that much more than anybody else, I don't think. But it's a big Republican talking point. And so he said, I'm going to break up the Ninth Circuit. And I'm not sure what the basis of that is. I don't think the Ninth Circuit covers that much more than anybody else per judge that they have on their bench. There's a larger bench in the Ninth Circuit. But I guess because it has California in there and people are constantly thinking about breaking up California, and since there are even more states in the Ninth Circuit than just California, well, obviously that's just too big because, I don't know, California, it's huge. So that must be the reason. Never mind, of course, the fact that the judge we're talking about, while he serves in a district court that is within the jurisdiction of the Ninth Circuit, he's not on the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals, and he had nothing to do with what the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals has to say on anything, and the Ninth Circuit hasn't spoken on sanctuary cities, or at least not on this angle of it, and he's all set to break them up anyway. So that lived and died in yesterday's bubble in between shows. In addition to that, right after we got off of the air, somehow it begins to break that, and I really don't know how. We should really examine this, or we should really have the journalism critics examine this. It breaks through Axios, which, as you'll recall, is the operation of what's all their names? The guys who used to do the Politico morning thing. We got to win the morning. You remember those guys? Well, now they're winning the morning on behalf of themselves as Axios instead of on behalf of their corporate paymasters at Politico. Doing pretty much the same thing. So their big scoop to win the morning, even though by that point it was afternoon, was that Ivanka Trump was going to be starting a new international foundation that was going to solicit contributions and accept contributions from anybody, really. Corporations, foreign governments, foreign individuals, anybody who wanted to donate. But the point is that it would have a very good purpose. They were going to be promoting women's entrepreneurship and micro business and investment, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. All good things around the globe. Just so long as there were some women involved in it, it was going to be fantastic, terrific. I support it 100%. In fact, it's the most terrific thing I've ever heard proposed ever for women, to be honest. And of course, You know how they sometimes say it takes a woman, right? Ivanka, she is one. I know this because, anyway, we won't get into the specifics of it, but she was going to start an international foundation that could accept donations from anyone to do fantastic things. The Trumps, of course, have a little bit of a history with not really administering their foundations all that well. And, of course, everybody realized within seconds, although somehow this escaped Axios in its initial reports, I think. Maybe not. Maybe they knew exactly what it would remind people of, and that was the Clinton Foundation, and that this would generate all sorts of outrage and therefore clicks. Maybe we should give them the benefit of the doubt. I think they're probably smart enough to figure that out. It's amazing that they didn't make any mention of it, but maybe it was just that makes it all the more outrageous. People will click through to see whether or not it's really true that we didn't make any mention of the Clinton Foundation because that's so outrageous. That's kind of smart. Anyway, yes, it reminded everybody of the Clinton Foundation, and we were once again back in a situation where whatever Trump attacked in the campaign, he was now doing for himself, or at least Ivanka was going to be doing this stuff. What was really strange was that by evening, the story changed, and I mean changed dramatically. It's not a foundation per se, and Ivanka won't really be in control of how the money is spent. She's going to be somewhat distanced from it, by which I mean she's not going to have anything to do with it. That is to say, it's actually a World Bank project, and it's not new, and it already exists, and Ivanka heard about it and likes it. Is that where we sort of stand now? Now she's gone from, I'm going to start a foundation. This is the way Axios was reporting it. I'm going to start a foundation. It's going to be fantastic. I'm going to do all these things, supporting women all around because I support women. So does my dad. You guys who booed me are totally wrong. P.S. No, I'm not. I am not starting it. It's already started. I don't have anything to do with it, and I won't. And it's the World Bank. And in fact, the person that runs that is the person seated next to me in the panel, not me. I don't really know how this got started. So I would like to know, we need an investigation to that. Somebody got pantsed here. Was it the Trumps who once again thought, I'll just announce some dumb crap because I'm getting booed about women's entrepreneurship and promoting women and women's rights and respect for women around the world and my father's poor relationship with that, so I'm going to start this entrepreneurs fund and and show everybody that we really do have a heart, except you found out, no, that would be hugely illegal and in particular politically perilous for you because it's everything you said about crooked Hillary now projected onto yourselves again, as always. Or was Axios pantsed on this? Did they just basically swallow whatever somebody, I don't know whether Ivanka said it. If Ivanka said it, I'm a little bit concerned, but where else would it come from? But did the White House operation say, she's going to start this thing and it's going to be awesome and you guys should report it? And Axios said, yeah. Or was it somewhere in the middle? Did they say, we're going to lie and say Ivanka is going to start this thing? And Axios guys said, that's an obvious lie, but we're going to get so many clicks. Let's run it. I don't know. I'm not really sure which one it is, but I bring it up because I did read the other day and I just realized I think that I don't have it in pocket somehow and I'm going to have to look this up. But I read, and I can't believe I didn't put this aside. I wonder why. At the time it made sense, but that's the way it is on everything. I always regret not putting something in pocket. But how can I find this? I should go to Google News. Somebody said that it was, how did they put it? That the Trump, was it the press or communications office, that they are like basically so bored that they have, because there's no policy or anything going on and they're kept out of the loop. And so what they do to entertain themselves, I guess maybe it is in this. And which reminds me, I guess I do have at least one story set aside on it in Politico magazine. Yeah, and I think I saw that again yesterday, and somebody else was analyzing it from a totally different angle. So I'm going to bring up a different analysis of it. But now that I realize what I'm looking at, it was a Politico magazine article, and I'll see if I can find it in Pocket now. Trump's fake war on the fake news was the title here. And Ben, let's see, let me open up the original version of this so I can get everything right. It's bylined Ben Schreckinger and Hadass Gold. And here's the deal. Trump's fake war on the fake news. The president puts on a big show of assaulting his opposition, quote unquote opposition, in the news media. But inside the White House, it's a different story. And the gist of the story generally seems to be that, he has this very complicated relationship with the press, but he loves to attack them, but he also loves to court them. And that explains, for instance, the failing New York Times and how he'll have the New York Times in for an exclusive interview in the White House, in the Oval Office, that he's playing this game. But they're actually, I think, that this was, analyzed just the other day by Jay Rosen, who said it was a kind of a fascinating look. And he viewed it as the piece was fascinating because they talked to all of lots of the reporters in the White House press corps and got sort of their insider comments on what's it really like on the inside covering the White House. And the picture that they uncovered was they understood that he was playing this game, and they were really actually kind of having the time of their lives playing around in what he calls the playground, as they view it, inside the Washington or inside the White House press corps. But I think this article first came to my attention for the take that David Edwards gave to it over at Raw Story. The headline on his take on the Politico story being, "It's a game to them. Sources close to the White House say staffers do much of their lying for sport." And that's the part that I think might be relevant to explaining how it was that we spent yesterday afternoon saying, oh my God, Ivanka's opening a Clinton Foundation, to no, she's not, and she never was, and there's nothing like it ever going to happen. And I wondered whether this was something that they planted with Axios to say, let's see if we can get them to print this and then pull the rug out from underneath them. Here's the David Edwards write-up for it. Sources close to the White House revealed to Politico that President Donald Trump's aides have been competing to see who can tell the biggest lies to the media. In a report for Politico magazine, Ben Schreckinger and Hadass Gold explain that Trump is waging a, quote, fake war on fake news. Rather than a historically toxic relationship, and then here in brackets, members of the White House press corps, unbracketed, described a historic gap between the public perception and the private reality, the report noted. According to Politico, White House Chief Strategist Steve Bannon and the White House Press Secretary Sean Spicer have both been privately cultivating relationships with the media while attacking the same outlets in public. But the White House's habit of constantly lying about inconsequential details, like the size of Trump's inauguration crowd, continues to perplex reporters. White House staffers, it says here, do much of the lying for amusement, Politico explained, and here is the excerpt from Politico's piece. Bannon, it is worth noting, is a devoted reader of the neo-reactionary, quote-unquote, neo-reactionary internet philosopher Curtis Yarvin, that's a generous description, an advocate of the strategic benefits of spreading misinformation. Whatever. Another pseudo-intellectual pursuit for Bannon. But two people close to the administration say that White House staffers do much of their lying for sport rather than to further any larger agenda. And maybe they just don't understand the brilliant Bannon strategy, or maybe they're rolling their eyes at the stupid pseudo-intellectualism of it all and say, he demands that we participate. In other words, I guess since nobody knows what the hell he's talking about, go out there and lie. I don't know. He wants you to lie for some strategic reason. No one understands what the strategic reason is. There is no strategic reason. He thinks it's a strategy because whatever this goofball on the internet says, it's a strategy. And this dumbass believes it. But he's nominally your boss or has influence over your boss and can get you fired. So if he demands some lies and thinks that lies are strategic and you can't think of a strategic reason for lying about anything, just make it this way. Think of it this way. Think of it as a game. Lie the best you can. Who can get the biggest lie reprinted in the press, and that guy gets $20. Whatever. So that's what's going on here. They all lie. A conservative journalist with close ties to the West Wing who described an informal contest to smuggle the biggest whoppers into print. It's a game to them. Wait a minute. I hear Trump come stumbling out of someone wasting whoppers. I love whoppers. They're terrific. I love them. I like Big Macs. It's true, but American hamburger innovation. Let me just tell you, it's a terrific thing. The Whopper has it all. Sesame seed buns, to be sure, but it's so delicious, so fantastic. The lettuce, the tomato, when the lettuce is so crisp and the tomato is sliced nice and thin, so perky. I love it, right? We're borrowing from the mutton lettuce tomato thing. He can't believe Whoppers are being smuggled out of the White House. You should be smuggling Whoppers into the White House. That's the way we should be working things. A member of the White House communications team confirmed the situation to one conservative activist who spoke to Politico. The article continues, "They'll print what they want anyways, so we may as well have fun," the activist said. This is the raw story wrap-up of that excerpt. So I guess I wondered yesterday whether that was one of the whoppers that they tried to get into the press. Like, wouldn't it be hilarious if we told the press that Ivanka was going to just blatantly recreate the Clinton Foundation? That's the most unbelievable thing in the world. I wonder if we can get somebody dumb enough to print it. Who should we try? Axios. Now, like I said, Axios may have quote unquote fallen for it just for the clicks, but I don't know. I mean, I think that there should be some examination of, like, was Axios just far too credulous on this, or whatever. I guess it's easy enough to explain away as clickbait, but even that should be something we talk about. They're willing to print things that they know to be outrageous lies for the clicks. What does that make you besides fake news? I don't know. I mean, I don't want to necessarily classify Axios that way, but I would like to rein people in from winning the morning at all costs in a situation like this. I think we should be careful about what we allow this White House to get away with. Back to Oliver Willis's comment from earlier in the morning that he tweeted that this is Trump's habit. You get the headline you want and then back away from the story entirely. And I don't think it serves any news purpose to, even if you win the morning, to print something that is garbage to begin with. All right. Greg has just sent me a monkey cage write-up from Sarah Binder and co-byline here, Mark Spindell, on "This is why Trump's legislative agenda is stuck in neutral." How big and how long is this thing? Interesting. So I guess it expands on the earlier discussion and the procedural rules, etc. But I'm thinking this might be this could be maybe the Friday piece to discuss all of this. I mean, one of the reasons that the legislative agenda is stuck in neutral is that they haven't written it yet, which I guess brings me to another of the issues that sparked to life yesterday post-show. We did talk about the possibility with Joan that he was that Trump was actually going to try and introduce some kind of major tax reform. He had promised, like last week, Wednesday, I'll have it for you, major tax reform. A huge announcement, gigantic, enormous changes in policy. He's going to remake the way the federal government does everything, really. And naturally, he didn't have anything, and they sketched something together, and literally, almost literally, back of a cocktail napkin, they put out, the major announcement was a one-pager full of bullet points that don't make any particular sense about the most general BS you ever heard that barely passes. It's certainly, did Jay Rosen say this also last night? Yeah, I think he did. And I'll bring this one up. I got to open up my own timeline to see where I retweeted this thing. He basically said, a persnickety, as he said, a persnickety editor, fully alive, as he put it, to questions of accuracy, would not allow the term tax plan to be used in today's White House coverage, because that one-pager is nothing like a tax plan. It's basically a collection of, offhand talking points that have been bandied about in conservative circles for a long time. The flatter tax, if not a flat tax, cutting things down to 3 tax brackets. Well, guess what? You'll never guess how many. That's been discussed forever by Heritage Foundation types. And, if we can't get to the 10% flat tax, then we'll just flatten the tax. That somehow will simplify this. You remember the other day, Paul Ryan was tweeting around pictures of himself holding a postcard, reviving the old trope the Republicans have. Wouldn't it be great if you could file your taxes on a postcard? You can. You just can't take advantage of the entirety of the tax code, though. If all you want to do is declare how much money you made and what your tax rate is and then pay it, you could do that on a postcard. It's just going to cost you more money, which is what this plan would do if you're middle class or below. If you're upper class, if you're rich, if you're wealthy, you save money and you'll want to use all the advantages you can. But the basic idea was they were going to have 3 tax brackets now instead of however many we've got. I don't even know how many we've got at the moment. And they were going to be, this was hilarious. They were going to be 15%, 25%, and 35%. And that's all the bullet points said. These are the 3 brackets. And as Justin Wolfers pointed out yesterday, that doesn't even count as the outline of a tax plan. He says at minimum, a tax plan has to say, if you earn X dollars, you pay Y dollars in tax. Somehow Trump's Treasury and Stephen Mnuchin, who was incorrectly identified in the releases as the Secretary of Commerce, says, they didn't even do that. They announced that there are going to be 3 tax rates, but not which incomes they apply to. That's literally all it says. We're going to reduce the 7 tax brackets currently, there's the answer, to 3 tax brackets. Oh, and this one says 10%, not 15%. 10%, 25%, and 35%. Well, at what income level does it kick up to 25%? They didn't even say that. They didn't even do, at $100,000 it goes to 25%, and at $1 million it goes to 35%. They didn't even bother. How do you evaluate that? How do you score that? That's the big tax proposal? Somebody else tweeted yesterday, I thought was rather brilliant, like, this thing is a 1-pager. Well, I got to find it. It's not that far away. I want to credit the people who said this. Let's see. Adam McKay, I guess, is this one, who tweets as Ghost Panther. By the way, he says Trump's tax plan was 1 page. 1 page. I wonder if they considered writing it on a cake or in the foam of a latte. It's that short. It certainly could have been tweeted. There was no reason to even waste a piece of paper. But if you look at the page, you have to kind of zoom in a little bit to see it. But this is the whole thing here. I don't see the business reform. Oh, yeah, that goes all the way down here. So here's the deal. I'll read you the whole proposal. Normally, taxes take quite a bit of paper to write the whole tax code. But the goals, and that's all they are, grow the economy and create millions of jobs. Wow, that's a great plan. I'm going to do that too. Simplify our burdensome tax code. Whatever. Provide tax relief to American families, especially middle class or middle income families, and lower the business tax rate from one of the highest in the world, which it isn't, to one of the lowest. So, the specifics kick in here. Ready for your individual reform? Tax relief for American families, especially middle income families. Ready? Reducing 7 brackets to 3. Here are the 3 brackets, but we won't tell you how much you have to earn to be in each one. Doubling the standard deduction. That's nice. I like that. And providing tax relief for families with child and dependent care expenses. Hooray. I told you Ivanka was telling the truth. He loves women. or something. That's actually supposed to be the big fulfillment of the promise there. The simplification for individuals includes eliminating targeted tax breaks that mainly benefit the wealthiest taxpayers, protecting the home ownership and charitable gift tax deductions, repeal the alternative minimum tax, and repeal the so-called death tax, which, by the way, of course, you don't get taxed for dying. The tax is on inheritance. It used to be the inheritance tax. Back on Monopoly game days, that quaint old game where rich people could actually go to jail, especially when they went bankrupt. We'll remind you, it's an inheritance tax is what it is. They thought it would be clever to rename it the death tax. So, all of those are old tropes, like we said. But, one, there's no specifics. And two, they're basically saying we're eliminating all tax deductions. That's how you're going to get your taxes onto a postcard. No more listing things that you're deducting from your taxes. You get a standard deduction, which will be doubled. And you can still write off your home mortgage, although God only knows what they mean by this, because, it should go back to primary home only, but he owns 10,000 homes, so he's not likely to do that. And also you get to keep the charitable gift tax deductions so that I can plausibly give away my foundation's money, which isn't my money, and still take a tax deduction on it. The business reform is even simpler, I guess. 15% business tax rate. There's all sorts of problems associated with it. But anyway, zero in the way of specifics. And this was the Treasury Secretary handing this thing out. So big, just a total disgrace from that perspective. So, thought it was a funny tweet. Piece of garbage should have been written on a cocktail napkin, but it could have fit on a cake. Congratulations. You done it. So anyway, that may already be out of the news. I haven't seen it being withdrawn just yet, but it was my assumption. I said, like last night, I assumed that by the end of the show, really, the CEO of H&R Block will have talked to Trump about how many jobs would be lost if people could fill out their taxes on a postcard, and that'll be the end of that. He'll have backed away from that. Having gotten the headlines that they were totally going to reform everything, he's satisfied with just that. Okay, let's see. Other issues, I think that covers everything that we almost did yesterday, minus, the almost nuclear war, right, North Korea. Everybody got on a bus. Bernie Sanders apparently making a big deal out of not getting on the bus and not going because he didn't want to be a part of the photo op that took place over there, although I have seen zero photos, except of the crappy-ass bus that the senators went over there, which was apparently duct-taped together in some way. Basically, though, word out of the briefing was that they don't know what the hell they were there for. They didn't learn anything. The president, according to reporters who asked people on their way out, says the president spent a total of 14 minutes. Somebody must have timed it on their watch in the briefing. He trucked them all over there, told them nothing. They came away with zero news about what our North Korea policy is and what we were likely to do about anything. And they have no idea why they had to waste their day. But I assume that the White House wanted news reports and some visuals of people coming and going to make it look like something was happening there. So, I don't know. That seems kind of weird, but that's what they did. So that's better than actually starting the war, though. So I'm glad that they delayed on that one. All right, I think jumping out of the news cycle that was yesterday, we can look at a couple other areas here and try to flag some good stuff, some bad stuff, some interesting stuff, some stuff I'll set aside for Friday. As a matter of fact, possibly what I would, now maybe we can cram this one in. All right. Well, anyway, thinking out loud on the air. One other item I need to bring up on the list that we discussed yesterday that has some developments. The Hill reporting that this is likely to be how they'll deal with the looming government shutdown issue. Joan told us yesterday it looked unlikely that we would see a shutdown, and we weren't quite sure what final form the solution would take. We should have guessed this, because this was pretty obvious now in hindsight. The solution was going to be, let's just do something temporary again until we can figure out what the real solution needs to be. The Hill says lawmakers are pushing a 1-week funding bill to prevent the government shutdown as leadership continues to negotiate a larger agreement. On Wednesday night, Representative Rodney Frelinghuysen of New Jersey, thank God I actually know how to pronounce that last name. If you've ever seen it written, wow. The chairman of the House Appropriations Committee, Frelinghuysen, has introduced a 1-week bill to fund the government through May 5th, predicting leadership would announce a long-term deal shortly. This continuing resolution will continue to keep the government open and operating as normal for the next several days in order to finalize the legislation to fund the federal government for the rest of the fiscal year, he said in a statement. I guess reading between the lines there, can we point out that Rodney Frelinghuysen, chairman of the House Appropriations Committee, says, I'll give you a 1-week CR and predict that leadership, somebody else, will announce a long-term deal shortly. This goes back to something we mentioned yesterday, the nationalization of everything and the centralization of policy making. The chairman of the Appropriations Committee, apparently at this stage of the game, has no idea whether or not there's going to be a long-term deal on his entire reason for being, the appropriations for the next fiscal year. How does the Appropriations Committee chair have no idea, or it's not even clear whether he's a part of the negotiations? He's just going to have it dictated to him by leadership, and he's going to print it up. This is what leadership said they want. We're doing it. The death of committee work, once again being illustrated here. And I guess it's connected easily enough to some Twitter exchanges I had yesterday about the tax plan. I pointed out, again, and I think this time with some success in terms of getting this thing retweeted anyway, but just pointing out once again, we're going to let Donald Trump rewrite the tax code while he says he's under audit, so that he can just legalize everything he's supposedly under audit for, is the basic assumption here. And I thought, once again, well worth pointing out. But, of course, I did get some pushback on that from conservatives and Trump defenders who said, Congress writes tax law, not the president. So don't, you obviously go learn how the government works and then come back to me. Well, I have some idea of how the government works. And they are right. It's usually Congress that writes tax laws. And in the end, they'll take the blame for it because they've got to enact whatever the tax law changes are. It isn't going to be Trump doing it himself. But, of course, yesterday we were discussing the White House's, Trump's tax proposal. If you can't blame Trump for Trump's tax proposal, what else? What have we got left at this point? But it brings up an interesting point. Who would we say is the author of a tax proposal that Trump writes, hands to Congress, and says, put this on parchment and give it to me? And they do. Supposing they do. Supposing for whatever reason they abdicate all their responsibilities and simply put what he wants on paper and hand it back to him. To whatever end, whether it gets overturned in the courts or struck down piece by piece, I don't know. It doesn't matter what happens to it. But supposing he did that, who would we say wrote that? Because that would make for an interesting case. If it got to, review in the courts would say, well, technically for the purpose of our analysis here, we're supposed to be assuming that the Congress did this. But everybody knows that Trump dictated the outcome and that they just accepted it. If we literally can see that there was literally no changes between the what was on paper when Trump gave it to him and the parchment that came out of there, would we bother with the fiction of saying this was crafted by Congress? Sometimes we adopt that construction just to make things easier to deal with intellectually at the court level. But that's another part of the normalization process. Like, it's not normal for the president to dictate to Congress what they should put in legislation. But if he were to do that, built into the canons of construction over in the courts would be the assumption that Congress approved, independently of this language and that they adopted it of their own volition, because they had the opportunity to amend it and decided not to. But of course, if they, for instance, if things really get out of control fascism-wise and they feel like they're under some threat if they were to entertain any amendments. Should the courts normalize something like that? I mean, this is speculative and we're way out on a future limb here, but should that come to pass and should the courts have to consider something like that, let's just flag that for future analysis. It would be normalizing something horrible if we went with the regular canons of construction there and said simply because the Congress was intimidated into rubber stamping this thing, Congress now owns it and the president had nothing to do with it. I thought that was just sort of an interesting dystopian future thought that we might entertain. Let's see. But anyway, so I guess that's another big question, and I don't know. It came to mind off of the idea that somehow the chairman of the Appropriations Committee was working that way. That the Speaker of the House dictates what appropriations policy is going to be, and the Appropriations Chairman just works within those parameters. All right. There's let's see, much more, of course. And I would recommend to you, here's a great headline for you about the NAFTA issue, whether we're in or out. I actually put this one aside. I thought I would go to it earlier, but I was talking to Greg. We did it a different way. Anna, another user over at Daily Kos, under the handle of Anna. Wow, how would you read this out? A lot of numbers. 1987-6. I don't know. 19876. Anna, I don't know why those numbers are at the end. I don't know why anything, but I assume they have some relevance to you. But if you're looking for the author here, Anna 19876, I thought your headline on the NAFTA thing was great. Is this a effing game? She goes with F asterisk 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 ing. Is this a effing game? An effing game. After phone calls to Mexico and Canada, Trump agrees not to terminate NAFTA. Right? Earlier in the day, she of course grabs this headline from where? I don't know, but The Independent, over in the UK paper. The Independent. Donald Trump to sign executive order withdrawing U.S. from NAFTA. The draft order is in the final stages of review. And then, not a couple hours later, Daniel Dale's tweet, breaking Trump statement. President Trump agreed not to terminate NAFTA at this time in conversations with Mexican and Canadian leaders today. 6 hours in that turnaround. And, Anna, you got it right. You're asking the right questions. Is this a game or what? I guess so. And I guess I don't understand the game and I guess I'm out of touch. And, it finally came to light for me earlier this week with, I've always considered the possibility that I didn't know what the hell Trump voters were thinking. And, I guess that's why I was sometimes willing to entertain ideas like, let's reach out and understand, or let's read Chris Arnade, or let's let Greg tell us to read Chris Arnade and let Armando argue with him. But I now know that I really don't understand them. But maybe I never will, and maybe I don't want to anymore. I'll read you this story. This seems like a good way to spend the last couple minutes of the show. And we'll save for Friday all these other things, including it's time to get on the record with Sebastian Gorka. I know I've had tons of stories and I just never really got to it. You know, he's a Nazi, blah, 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 but there's so much more to his background. He's a fraudster and a goofball, and he may be out by the end of the week. So maybe we'll use Friday to squeeze in the fact that I know he's totally fraudulent and he's made everything up about his background. That's what everybody's reporting. And I don't want to miss it. I hope it all doesn't happen today or Friday. I hope it doesn't happen until next weekend. Anyway, we have this story instead. This is how you know you're never going to understand anybody. Paint shop owner Juan Carlos Enriquez took on Trump and won. This is a feel-good story. This is being reported in NBC News. Tracy Connor is the report here. Florida paint shop owner Juan Carlos Enriquez has what you might call a complicated relationship with Donald Trump. For 3 years, he waged a fierce legal battle to get the real estate mogul to make good on an unpaid bill. We heard this story during the campaign. These were the profiles that the Hillary Clinton campaign was putting out about small business owners and contractors who had been screwed by Trump personally. That Trump had personally promised to pay them money and then flipped them the bird. And how could he possibly be good for America? Look what he's doing to small businessmen in America, the backbone of America. Could you be more patriotic? I don't think so, right? So, for 3 years, he waged a fierce legal battle to get the real estate mogul to make good on an unpaid bill. Politics, oh, well, you know what? I'll skip down here and I'll tell you the story of the suit, which is told backwards. Ready? 2 weeks ago, an appeals court ordered Trump's company to pay Enriquez for $32,000 worth of paint used in a golf resort renovation, the Doral Club that he bought down there in Florida, plus his legal fees. The total, more than $300,000. A lot of people tried to beat this guy. Bush, Cruz, Rubio, all lost against him, but we beat him, said Enriquez, one of at least 60 people who have sued Trump and his companies over unpaid bills. And you know how Trump deals with these things. He makes a contract and he says, there was something wrong with the work and I'm only going to pay you 10 cents on the dollar. And they say, screw you, I'll sue you. And he says, go ahead, I'll sue you and we'll keep you in court for years and you're not going to get your money. Even if you win, you're not going to get your money for years. It's not worth it. You're going to incur so many legal bills. You should just take the 10 cents on the dollar. So, Enriquez is one of at least 60 people who've sued Trump over stuff like this. Enriquez, born and raised in Miami, son of Cuban immigrants. He worked for paint giant Sherwin-Williams for 2 decades, then decided to go into business with his brothers. 9 years ago, they launched the Paint Spot, which now has 3 locations in the Miami area. In the fall of 2013, this small business got a big job, the subcontracting job, on the $200 million remodeling of the Trump National Doral Golf Resort, included $142,000 worth of paint from Enriquez. The paint was delivered and used, court records show. Trump Endeavor, the company that operates the resort, paid the early installments of the bill, but after the subcontractor walked off the job, Enriquez never got a final payment of about $32,000. In the fall of 2014, Enriquez filed a lien, a legal tool used to recover debt by tying up a piece of property. He said he offered to settle the matter for $26,000, but the Trump team balked. Not surprising, since Trump has repeatedly boasted that he never settles. Months went by, and Enriquez followed up with a lawsuit. The resort fought back on technical grounds. Get this one. A piece of paperwork Enriquez filed listed the wrong subcontractor. Enriquez had received the document from a Trump official. The Trump people put the wrong subcontractor on it, but he failed to correct it. And then the Trump lawyers tried to claim that made the lien invalid. Here's an idea. Put Smith subcontractors on it instead of Jones. And if he doesn't see it, we'll try and get the lien dismissed because it's the wrong subcontractor. What a devious plot. But I guess probably a common trick among these killers that are out there. Well, anyway, when we sat down for the deposition, his lawyers tried to intimidate me and say that if I lost, I would have to pay their fees, Enriquez said. I said, let's play ball. I've been playing ball all my life, whatever that's supposed to mean. Now, a Miami-Dade Circuit Court judge didn't buy the Trump defense, ruling in the spring of 2016 that the resort had to pay for the paint. You remember, it made the news. They made a commercial out of it. Then the judge tacked on a multiplier to compensate Enriquez's lawyer, Daniel Vega, for taking the case on contingency, swelling the award by $283,949.91 in legal fees. That extra 1 cent, the killer. The Trump organization decided to appeal. All right? So first they give you the wrong information on the subcontractor and try to get your lien dismissed on that. Then they lose on that. Then they lose the case. Then they appealed the case. Appealed. And the case was still pending when Enriquez, let's just say, it becomes a critical moment. It's now late 2016, and maybe that was telling you too much. Okay? So here he is pissed off. He has been screwed over by the wrong information on the subcontractor thing, but he overcomes that, goes to court, wins. Trump says, screw you, I'm still not paying you. I'm appealing. Well, guess what? 2 weeks ago, we found out the outcome of this case. He lost the appeal. That's what's going on. And so on April 12th, Enriquez's lawyer called with the good news. The appeals court upheld the judge's order. The attorney who handled the case for Trump, Bruce Rogow, told NBC News there would be no further appeals. So it's over, right? He gets paid, right? The Trump Organization's general counsel, Alan Garten, didn't respond to requests for comment. Most of the award will go to Vega to cover his fees. Enriquez said he only expects to recoup the original $32,000 plus interest and some money he paid to cover legal costs. But guess what? I still haven't gotten my money, Enriquez says with a laugh. That's right. Trump tries to screw him with the wrong subcontractor thing and dismiss the lien, loses. Goes to court, loses the case. Appeals the case outcome, loses the appeal, and still says, meh, F you. I'm still not paying you. I'm still not paying you. From 2013, still not paying. I've lost in court twice. I've appealed and lost twice. What am I going to do here about getting this money? Here's the kicker. This happens in late 2016, and you know what's happening in late 2016? It's the election. So what does Enriquez do? Oh my God, you'll never believe it, except that I know you do believe it now. He voted for Trump. This effing idiot voted for Trump after all. And you know why he did it? He doesn't even say, well, I can't stand him. He's a scumbag, but I can't stand Hillary or anything like that. No, he says, you know what? At the end of the day, he says, you have to be a proud American. I praise Trump's immigration policies, son of immigrants, but, special kind of immigrants, right? Wink, wink. And he loves his no-nonsense style. You know what I like about this guy? He means what he says and he says what he means. His no-nonsense style? He sent you an intentionally fraudulent document designed for you to believe so that it would trip you up in court so that you couldn't get paid the $32,000 he was screwing you out of. Then he went to court anyway, and he lost, and such a believer in the rule of law that he said, screw you, I'm going to appeal and make it even worse for you. And then he lost the appeal, and now he can't appeal anything anymore, and he still, on top of the appeal, hasn't paid the money he owes you. But, yeah, you know what I like about him? No nonsense. He's all nonsense, and no one knows it better than you, and you still voted for him. Chris Arnade, interview this guy. Do I have to reach out and understand this dude, or what? There's no chance that's ever going to happen. I'm never going to understand that. I would never have cast that vote. I can't do it. I would have abstained from voting. I would have left the country if I had to not vote for the guy who was screwing me out of my business. I mean, maybe he doesn't care now. Maybe he's much more successful now. The $32,000 isn't a big deal. He's not going to get the $300,000. That's going to his lawyer. But let's talk to the lawyer, Chris Arnade. Talk to him. Find out whether can you imagine? He loses the case, appeals the case, loses the appeal, still not paying. That's a no-nonsense kind of a guy. It's all nonsense. It's always been nonsense from start to finish. Speaking of the finish, it's the finish of the show today. I better calm down and let you know what's coming up on the after show, because it is Thursday. I like the Italian I get to speak because thank God it's Giovedì. I always enjoy. I got to calm down. And we're going to save all this other great stuff for Friday. Much more in-depth stuff to look at. More procedural news, I guess, thanks to Sarah Binder and Greg Dworkin for sending me her piece. What's coming up later today following this on the after show? Next on Netroots Radio, the company pushing to scrap Obama-era prepaid debit card regulations. Who's trying to do that? Well, they paid $53 million to settle charges that it tricked its customers. I guess they'll get that waived by the new administration. Questions arise over where Steve Bannon gets his money when it's revealed there are no records he ever made money off Seinfeld. Yeah, that was a weird story. And the European Parliament acts to strip Marine Le Pen of immunity over charges she fraudulently used EU funds to pay for fake
From
jobs
Daily Kos Radio,
on her campaign.
On NetworksRadio.com. You have been listening to the Kagro in the Morning Show.
With David Waldman.
Man, these people think they can get away with anything. Now, the last half, they'll be visiting with Angela Marks, who you may know from Twitter as Angie in Washington State, for a discussion of Trump's attempts to undo net neutrality. Remember that? Trump gives anti-immigrant paranoid bigots a voice, and senators yesterday discovered you're either on the bus or you're off. I guess you could be under it, too.